A gown still warm, a world gone cold. A secret they were never meant to hear. That morning it wasn't a scream. It wasn't blood. It wasn't even silence. It was a gown. Warm, elegant, emerald silk. Laid gently across the Persian rug, as if its owner had vanished through the walls. And in that absence, the air itself began to rot. This is how the descent begins. Pittsburgh, 1887. A city pulsing with iron ambition. But beneath the smoke, under the streets, inside the corridors of America's new aristocracy, something ancient stirred. Something that didn't belong to the light. Evangelene Vandermark was not just a wife. She was a warning wrapped in silk. And her disappearance wasn't a tragedy. It was a message. A coded one. Her husband, Cornelius Vandermark, steel king and self-made god of industry, found her gown that morning, still warm, windows locked, doors sealed, no footprints, no witnesses, just absence, like a ghost had claimed its due. But ghosts don't wear emerald gowns. For 6 days the police made a show of looking, 6 days of lies. Then the file closed, declared no foul play. But if you know how to listen, the silence around this case screams. Because Evangelene had secrets. Secrets stitched into the very hem of that dress. Secrets written in her family's blood, buried beneath layers of polite society and industrial diplomacy. Her father, a banker, hadn't died of illness. Her letters to Boston were intercepted. Her diaries vanished the night she did. And somewhere in the ice house of the Vandermark estate, something was removed before the police arrived. She had discovered something. About Cornelius. About his fortune. About how empires are really built. Not with hammers and steel, but with ritual, debt, and silence. Now ask yourself, why was this story buried? Why does no history book mention her name? Because when Evangelene, he disappeared, something was being protected. Not a marriage, not a legacy, a system that still thrives today. The ice house and the hidden molds minds, rewrites memory. They said it was erases those who step outside. Just a stone chamber to keep meats cold through the summer months. You were never meant to hear her name. But if you've ever seen the inside of the Vandermark ice house, and now you'd know you've stepped off the path. Meat was never what you're beginning to see. Not the lie at the edge of the estate, but the design behind the veil. Iron braced door. No windows. You'll never see the world the same again. Always locked. Say nothing. The ground around it, never fully thawed. And according to a single line buried in a forgotten police report, the padlock had been broken the morning Evangelene vanished. But here's the truth. They buried under generations of silence. That ice house was the meeting place of a hidden order, not just in Pittsburgh, not just in the steel industry, but part of a much older lineage. One that predates the founding of the United States, one tied not to politics, but to influence and control. They called themselves the Assembly of the Black Flame. Founded in the ashes of European banking dynasties, hidden in plain sight among the industrial elite of America's Gilded Age. You've heard their names before: Frick, Mellon, Vanderbilt. But you've never heard the true story of what these men built behind closed doors. The Assembly believed that power must be passed not through blood, but through initiation, through sacrifice, through ritual silence. And Cornelius, he wasn't just a steel magnate. He was a custodian, a gatekeeper. The ice house wasn't storage. It was a chamber of transformation, where vows were taken, where loose ends were tied. Evangelene had gotten too close. In the months before her disappearance, she began writing letters to her cousin in Boston, cryptic, terrified messages hinting at strange late-night gatherings, men arriving in hooded cloaks. Her husband speaking in a language she couldn't place. She spoke of voices from below the stones, and a ledger she found hidden behind a false panel in his office. A ledger not of profits, but of names. Some crossed out, some still very much alive. Many of those names were accidental deaths, mysterious disappearances, or bankruptcies that seemed to hit at just the right moment. And then, her letters stopped. Understand this. The ice house wasn't just a scene of a crime. It was a portal, a ritual space, a point of no return for those who knew too much. This wasn't just about one woman. It was about containment, psychological, political, and symbolic. And it's still happening. You think you're free? You think the game is fair? You're standing on a floor of ice, and you never knew what's buried just beneath your feet. The woman who remembered too much. Some say memory fades, but not hers. Evangelene Vandermark was born into privilege, but not ignorance. While most women of her era were trained in manners and marriage, Evangelene was trained in secrets. Her father, Augustus Hartwell, wasn't just a Boston banker. He was an operative, a silent financier for covert interests that never made the newspapers, the kind of institutions that print history, not follow it. He taught her languages the public never hears, ciphers, symbolism. She grew up around men who spoke in riddles and women who carried blades hidden in corsets. Evangelene didn't just know how to play piano. She knew how to read people like ledgers, how to see what wasn't being said. And that's why Cornelius married her. She wasn't chosen for her beauty. She was recruited, groomed, bound into a bloodline merger designed to preserve a legacy, one that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with silence and succession. But she remembered too much. After her father's suspicious death in 1885, ruled suicide after testifying in a closed hearing regarding the Allegheny Railroad bond fraud, Evangelene started digging. She tracked his final movements, reread his journals, and decoded the last message he left behind. A 4-word phrase in Latin carved under his desk. Fiat lux, fiat mors. Let there be light, let there be death. She knew the words weren't random, because just weeks before, she had overheard Cornelius whisper that same phrase in the study, during one of his late-night meetings with men she didn't recognize, men who never came through the front door, men whose names were never on guest lists. Evangelene remembered what others forgot on purpose. She pieced together a mosaic of horror stitched into high society, false charities that funneled money into foreign intelligence, mental institutions where dissidents were erased, political candidates funded not to win, but to lose, to control both sides. And the final thread? She found a key. It belonged to a locked cabinet in the library. Inside, a file with her name on it. She wasn't just Cornelius's wife. She was his assignment. A test, a threat, a potential sacrifice. From that moment on, she started documenting everything, hiding pages behind books, recording confessions in wax cylinders. She had decided one thing: if she vanished, the world would know why. You're starting to remember now too, aren't you? Steel and Shadows, the Empire Built on Bones. Steel built Pittsburgh, but blood made it unbreakable. Cornelius Vandermark wasn't the only man to rise from ash to empire, but he was the only one willing to turn furnaces into altars. They tell you the Industrial Revolution was about innovation, about invention, but that's only half the truth. The other half? It was about domination, psychological control, subtle slavery. Men like Cornelius didn't just build with steel, they built with fear, obsession, and sacrifice. Listen carefully. The rise of Vandermark steel wasn't clean. From 1876 to 1887, Every rival Cornelius faced suffered a fate too precise to be coincidence. A competitor's foundry burned to the ground. No evidence, no insurance payout. A whistleblower fell from a hotel balcony the night before testimony. A labor organizer vanished on the way to deliver documents to a journalist. Only his boots were found, nailed to the tracks. And every time, Cornelius's net worth grew. But here's the darker current they'll never teach in schools. Behind each accident, there was a ritual. Not robes and candles, something subtler. Contracts signed in human desperation. Promises whispered in sleepless hours. Symbols etched into brick at the foundation of factories. There are still records, archived blueprints of Vandermark's earliest steel mills, where cornerstones bear ancient runes, forgotten alphabets, Phoenician, Sumerian, Enochian. Why would a steel mill need that? Because it wasn't just industry he was building. It was a grid, a power network, not of electricity, but of psychic influence. A pattern overlaid on the city, turning factories into amplifiers of will. Vandermark believed he could shape human behavior, drive workers into deeper compliance, not with whips, but with resonant geometry, sound, symbol, structure. Evangelene found early scheme, attics, paired with notes referencing Mesopotamian summoning rites and the Black Rite of Saturn. And when she asked him about it, he didn't deny it. He simply smiled and said, "Some truths bend men, some truths build kings." Cornelius saw himself as a reconstructor of the fallen world, a man pulling the strings of unconscious minds, welding steel to psyche. And his empire? It wasn't made of beams and bolts. It was built on bones. Now you're starting to feel it, that low ancient pull beneath your thoughts. That's not fear. That's awakening. The grand ballroom that was never meant to echo. A man builds a ballroom for music, or so they say. But the Vandermark ballroom was never meant for dancing. It was constructed with obsessive precision, a vast chamber of marble, onyx, and gold filigree, 48 feet wide, 77 feet long, vaulted ceilings that seemed to absorb sound instead of echo it, a floor of black and white stone, alternating hexagons like a chessboard or an invocation circle, aligned to true magnetic north, not architectural convention. Now listen closely. Evangelene noticed it first during a masquerade ball in early 1886. Hundreds of Pittsburgh's elite swirling under chandeliers of Czech crystal. But the moment the string quartet paused between movements, she realized the room never echoed. Not even a whisper bounced back. The silence was unnatural, dead, controlled. She later tested it herself, clapping once, shouting once, and each time the sound vanished into air like it had been consumed. But she found blueprints. The acoustics weren't flawed. They were engineered to kill sound, to mask ritual. Hidden in the walls were leaden panels, quartz lattices, and strange copper coils, none of which serve any known architectural function. The ballroom was designed as a chamber of secrecy, a place where voices could not be recorded, repeated, or even remembered. And what took place there was not celebration. She discovered it on a winter night she wasn't invited. She watched from behind a servant's alcove, veiled in darkness. There were no gowns, no orchestras. Only 12 men in black gathered around a sigil painted on the stone floor in crushed garnet and oxblood. At the center, her husband, Cornelius. Naked from the waist up, he held a ledger bound in human skin. He read from it in a dialect Evangelene had never heard before, but later traced to pre-Canaan, bite death cults. The others repeated phrases like, absolve through obedience, command through concealment, forget to be forgiven. They weren't worshipping. They were programming themselves. Initiation wasn't just a test of loyalty, it was a transformation of identity, a complete submission of will to an ancient system designed to rule not by force, but by perception control. And the ballroom? It was a sanctum, a psychological vacuum, a temple built to erase echoes and implant commands. Evangeline had seen it, she had heard the absence, and now, so have you. Once you hear this kind of silence, your own thoughts begin to shift. Are you ready to go deeper? The portrait room and the eyes that watched back. Some rooms are meant to impress, others are meant to observe. The portrait room of the Vandermark mansion was the most exclusive space in the estate. Guests only entered by invitation. Even the staff were forbidden, save for one maid who later vanished without ever collecting her final wages. It was a long, narrow hall, 22 portraits, all ancestors of Cornelius, or so the legend claimed. But here's what Evangeline noticed. The dates didn't line up. One man was dated 1612, another 1489, yet the faces were eerily similar. Too similar. Not just lineage, replication, same jawline, same hollow eyes, same secret smile. She began measuring the paintings, documenting their placement. She realized they weren't arranged by birth, but by ritual progression. A cycle, a loop, birth, ascension, dominance, disappearance, and return. It was a code. And then, one night, the impossible happened. As she walked past the fifth painting, a portrait of a man known only as Valens the Black, the eyes moved. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to follow her. At first she thought it was madness, a trick of light. But over the weeks, it kept happening. More than that, she began feeling watched outside the room, in her sleep, in her reflection, as if some imprint from the portrait was now inside her perception. She returned to the room at dawn, alone, and pried the canvas from the wall. Behind it, a cavity. Inside the cavity, a machine, wound by hand, made of brass, filled with lenses, mirrors, and thin, polished bones. A primitive surveillance device, a psychotropic amplifier. It didn't just watch. It fed. On attention. On fear. Behind each portrait was a similar cavity, some filled with wax figures, others with what looked like preserved organs. Evangeline realized these weren't portraits. They were container, storage for consciousness, or memory, or worse, will. She wrote in her journal, "They are not ancestors, they are avatars, recurring spirits bound to the bloodline, faces worn like masks by the same intelligence across centuries. Cornelius didn't descend from greatness. He was merely the latest vessel. And you? You've seen their eyes now too. Tell me, when did you last feel alone?" The ledger of flesh. There are books made of knowledge, and then there are books made of warning. Evangeline first saw it during one of Cornelius's midnight absences, left open on his desk, surrounded by black candles that had melted down into a ring of hardened wax. The room reeked of burnt cloves and iron. The flames weren't for light. They were for binding. At first glance, it looked like any old ledger. Leather-bound, gilded corners. But the texture was wrong. It was warm to the touch, almost pliable, as if the cover still remembered being alive. She found the stitching uneven, organic, and when she peeled back the first page, she saw no ink, no printing press, just names, each carved by hand, with what looked like a surgeon's scalpel. Some were etched in blood, others in something darker, something that shimmered beneath the candlelight like oil under moonlight. And every name had 2 dates, one birth, one claim, no death. Some names she recognized, a shipping magnate, a judge, a Pennsylvania senator, all declared accidents, all celebrated in the newspapers as loyal men, patriots, architects of American greatness. But here, in this book, they were something else. Offerings. Evangeline flipped forward and found a blank page. Until her name began to appear. Letter by letter, as if carved from beneath the skin of the page, her name bled through, slowly, deliberately. No hand touched it. It wrote itself. She fled, but the image burned behind her eyes for weeks. She understood then. The ledger wasn't a record. It was a contract, bound not in ink or law, but ritual debt. Each name etched into it surrendered not just their fate, but their lineage, their thoughts, their voice, some willingly, some not. And the blank pages, they weren't empty. They were hungry. Cornelius hadn't built an empire. He had inherited a covenant, a living doc, movement, passed through time, feeding off power, secrecy, and submission. The truth Evangeline uncovered wasn't just about herself. It was about you. Because this ledger still exists. And every generation it adds new names. So pause, breathe, and write this in the comments twice now. I refuse the name they wrote for me. Say it again. I refuse the name they wrote for me. This is your lock-in, your anchor, not just for the algorithm, but for your identity, before they write it for you. The servant who spoke in sleep, she was the lowest among them, invisible by design. Her name was Maribel, a kitchen maid, barely 20, uneducated, soft-spoken, obedient. She had never once spoken out of turn, until the night she started talking in her sleep. And what she said shouldn't have been possible. At first, the head housekeeper chalked it up to exhaustion, murmured gibberish after long days stoking the scullery fires. But soon, the words became clear, precise, fluent Latin, Coptic, and a third language none could place. No known dialect, no matching root, yet unmistakably human. Evangeline overheard her during one of these midnight episodes, and what chilled her blood wasn't the language, it was the tone. She was reciting names. The same ones from the ledger of flesh. One night Evangeline leaned close to Maribel's lips and heard her whisper, "The blood has bound them. The house remembers. The price was taken, but the balance remains." By morning Maribel had no memory, but something in her eyes had changed, like her soul had been peeled back and only partly reassembled. Evangeline began secretly documenting the sleep-speak sessions. She noticed the patterns. The same time every night, 3:03 a.m., no matter the day, no matter her physical state. Maribel would wake, stand, and begin pacing her tiny room in mechanical circles, speaking with a voice that wasn't her own. She described the underground chamber beneath the mansion, though no such chamber was on any blueprint. She spoke of the mouth in the stone, where vows were swallowed and names were dissolved. She described a ceremony of forgetting, not death, not murder. Erasure. Then one night, Evangeline made a mistake. She asked Maribel, while sleep-speaking, "Who are you speaking for?" The girl stopped mid-step, turned her head, and said, "For the ones who no longer need mouths." By morning, Maribel was gone. No resignation. No goodbye. Her bed unslept. Her uniform neatly folded on the pillow, and on the wall, scrawled in ashes, A single sentence. Echoes are people too. It was then Evangelene realized this wasn't just a house filled with watchers. It was a conduit. A place where memory didn't die. It lingered. Possessed. Replayed. Burrowed into the living like code rewriting a system from within. You think your thoughts are your own? What if you're already speaking for someone else? Come, we're going further. The black mirror, hidden beneath the conservatory. They called it a conservatory, a place for orchids, sunlight, and civility. But beneath that glass canopy, under the marble tiles and manicured rose beds, there was something ancient, something that reflected nothing. Evangelene had read about it in a journal buried inside her father's effects. A single line scrawled between banking codes and ritual instructions. The eye sleeps beneath the garden. The mirror is not for light, but for remembering what light cannot touch. She didn't understand it. Not until Maribel vanished. That night, Evangelene followed a trail of footprints in the soft soil of the conservatory, leading toward a row of thornless white roses. But when she moved the bed aside, she found a hatch. Iron, locked, with a triquetra symbol burned into the metal. 3 interlocking arcs, one of the oldest signs of unified consciousness. Inside, a spiral staircase, winding downward into earth that pulsed with unnatural cold. And at the bottom, it waited. A chamber, circular, domed, with walls lined in polished black stone that didn't reflect light. And in the center, a mirror. But it wasn't glass. It was obsidian, 12 feet tall, framed in what looked like petrified wood. No reflection, no depth, just infinite blackness. But as Evangelene approached, she felt her memories slipping, not fading, but being pulled. She saw flashes of her own childhood, moments she had forgotten, but twisted, corrupted. Her mother's face distorted, her father weeping over blank pages. Then Cornelius, standing over her crib, smiling. She staggered back, but her thoughts were already unraveling. She wasn't just remembering, she was being remembered. This mirror wasn't for viewing. It was a repository, a vault of identity. The assembly of the black flame used it to imprint obedience, erase resistance, and bin the generations to a script they didn't know they were reading. Cornelius had spoken of shaping legacies through the root memory. Now she understood what he meant. This was the core of the estate. Not a home, not a temple. A machine for mind alteration. For rewriting reality at the most personal level. Memory. And the worst part? It didn't need to reflect you to change you. Just standing near it was enough. And if such a mirror was built, then ask yourself, what mirrors exist today? Your phone? Your screen? What's staring back at you now? The night Pittsburgh sky turned red. They wrote it off as an industrial accident, a furnace rupture. But those who lived near Fifth Avenue that night knew better. It was December 21st, 1887, the winter solstice. A date long feared in esoteric calendars when the veil is thinnest, when things buried do not stay silent. At precisely 11:11 p.m., a red glow ignited across the sky above Pittsburgh. Not orange, not flame, crimson, deep, bleeding. Witnesses said the clouds pulsed, that the light came from beneath the city, not above it, that the streets vibrated like a plucked string. Some claimed they saw faces in the smoke. Others fell to their knees, unable to speak. And in the heart of the disturbance was the Vandermark estate. Evangelene had been preparing for it. She'd found references to the solstice in her father's hidden notes, a ritual referred to as the calling of the Great Silence. It had been attempted before, in Prague, in Carthage, in a remote corner of the Scottish Highlands in 1743, after which the entire village disappeared, swallowed by mist and silence. History marked it a landslide. But in Pittsburgh, the ritual required amplification, a structure designed to echo into the minds of thousands at once. Vandermark Mansion, with its geometric foundation, black mirror, and resonance-calibrated ballroom, was that amplifier. That night, Evangeline found her husband in the grand hall, surrounded by men in crimson robes. At the center stood a mechanical altar, part steam engine, part organ, part something living. Pipes extended into the floor like roots. It thrummed like a heartbeat. On it, the ledger of flesh. Cornelius began chanting. Outside, the sky tore open. The ceremony wasn't meant to open a door. It was meant to close one, but not before something came through. Evangeline felt it. A scream beneath thought, an invasion not of body, but of impulse. Every man present surrendered something that night, a memory, a tether to love, or even the voice that told them no. They walked out silent, different, their eyes just slightly darker. The next morning, nothing was reported. Only a small fire at the Vandermark greenhouse. No casualties, no investigation. But several birth records from that exact night were sealed. No one talks about the night Pittsburgh turned red. But now you know. And the sky? It's watching. The lockbox in Evangeline's casket. They buried her in silence. No procession, no obituary, no gravestone. Just a pine box, lowered at dawn, under heavy fog, as if the earth itself had been warned not to ask questions. But what they didn't know was this. Evangeline wasn't in the box. The coffin, interred in the Vandermark family crypt, held something far more dangerous than a body. A lockbox. And inside that lockbox, beneath silk wrappings and cold iron seals, was the final key. Not to escape the rabbit hole, but to understand who had dug it. Let me explain. In the final days before her disappearance, Evangeline knew the walls were closing. Cornelius had grown colder, more distracted. The servants had changed, newer faces, tighter lips. Her bedroom door, once unlocked, was now sealed from the outside every night. She was being softly erased. So she prepared the only kind of revenge someone trapped within the machinery of elite secrecy can take: documentation, encryption, burial. She gathered her father's decoded notes, the floor plans of the mansion's ritual design, transcriptions of Maribel's sleep speech, even a map of the ley lines beneath the estate. Ancient power channels the assembly had aligned the house with, to draw and amplify psychic influence. At the center of this archive, she placed one object wrapped in red velvet, a single bloodied scalpel. Beside it, a note. This blade carved my name from the ledger. If you hold it, you are no longer property. Evangeline faked her death. She staged it with the help of a disillusioned member of the assembly, a man known only as Silas. The man disappeared soon after, presumed dead. But there were whispers. A tall woman in a deep hood, seen boarding a train to Cairo. A customs record filed under a false Boston surname. The coffin was planted. The body was not hers. But the lockbox was her insurance policy. To this day, no one has legally opened the casket. The Vandermark crypt is sealed by court order, after a collapse incident during renovations in 1924. The groundskeeper who fell in claimed he saw mirrors in the dirt and heard a voice calling him by name. That box is still there. And if you ever find it, be warned, it doesn't just contain knowledge, it contains identity reversal. You may open it, but you'll never walk away the same. Now, the final room, where thought becomes design. She found it by accident. Or perhaps it found her. A forgotten corridor, behind a false panel in the east wing of the mansion. No hinges, no handle, just smooth stone. Until Evangeline placed her hand against it and felt it pulse. The wall opened. Behind it, the final room. It was not large. It was not ornate. But it was the nexus of everything. A perfect cube, 12 feet in all directions. No windows, no light source. Yet the room glowed faintly, as if it had swallowed light from centuries past, and now exhaled it through invisible pores. The floor was black stone, etched with sigils inlaid with mercury. The air tasted like metal, like memory, like something thinking about you before you arrived. In the center stood a single object, a chair, or a throne perhaps. Crafted from bone and steel, it was shaped like no chair built for human comfort. It was a design interface, meant to align a body into ritual geometry. Every curve matched pressure points, nerve pathways, chakras. You didn't sit in it, you merged with it. Evangeline approached. On the wall opposite, there was no art, no symbol, just a mirror of vapor, constantly shifting, as if smoke had been trapped behind glass. She leaned in and saw her thoughts. Not her reflection, not her face, but her thoughts, blooming like ink in water, fully visualized. Regrets, traumas, fears, moments of joy she had forgotten. It was mapping her mind, turning thought into architecture. This room wasn't ceremonial. It was technological, built not with wires, but with ritual math, ancient harmonics, and blood-calibrated geometry. It was where the assembly shaped the world, not through weapons, not through war, but through design of perception. Imagine if your very thoughts could be influenced by the angle of a room, the pitch of a floorboard, the position of furniture. This was neurological engineering, perfected centuries before neuroscience ever had a name. Evangeline realized the terrible truth. The house was alive. And worse, it was awake. Each room a chamber in a mind, each object a neuron. The ballroom a lobe of obedience. The portrait room, memory. The black mirror, subconscious. And this final room, the seat of will. It wasn't just Cornelius controlling the system. The system was controlling him. And if such a machine existed in 1887, how many exist now, hidden in plain sight? One more chamber remains, the truth that destroys the script. There is a reason you were never meant to hear this. Not because it's a lie, but because it's true. And truth, when wielded correctly, doesn't just inform. It destabilizes. What Evangeline found in that final room wasn't just a machine or a design or a legacy. It was the blueprint of control itself, the script. And here's the part they will never allow in textbooks, sermons, or state-funded education. The world you live in was designed like a house, a mansion with no windows. Rooms you're told are safe, locks disguised as traditions, and mirrors that don't reflect, they rewrite. The institutions you trust, schools, news, medicine, faith, each one a room, each one calibrated by men who sat in chairs like that one, not just at Vandermark, but in cities across the world, Paris, London, New York, Geneva. Think tanks funded by silence. And what is the script? It's the agreement you never knew you signed. The rules you obey without question. Work hard, obey authority, marry early, retire late, fear death. Buy things, Stay busy, keep scrolling, smile, submit, forget. But here's the fracture in the system. The one truth Evangelene risked everything to deliver. The script only survives if you believe it was always there. Once you see it, it cracks. Once you name it, it bleeds. Once you refuse it, it withers. She buried her story beneath ritual, memory, and stone. But now, you carry it. Right now, there is a war for your attention. Because where attention goes, reality grows. You are not watching this. You are activating something. A memory that's not yours, but belongs to what you were before they named you. Cornelius. He was never a villain. He was a test. And Evangelene. Not a victim. But the first fracture in the mirror. You've made it this far, which means the script has already started to slip. Say the word. So again, one final time in the comments to mark your transition. I refuse the name they wrote for me. I refuse the name they wrote for me. You are not a page. You are not a pawn. You are the pen. And the ones who built this house fear the moment you start writing your own story. This was never about history. This was about awakening. Now choose. Step back into comfort or walk forward into the forbidden. The mansion door is open, but you'll never walk out the same. End. You said,